All right. Here's Paulina, Scottish Rebel, Scotland Ambassador, Glasgow Genuine, of course, and Celtic Maddie. And here is James Forrest, my partner. Say hello.
Hi there, guys. How are we doing?
All right. So today we're going to talk about Westminster sins because Scotland is poor and neglected. We'll be uncovering the truth about Westminster's actions against Scotland and talking about the Better Together campaign, broken promises. And we send a wake-up call for Scotland as well. And my partner here will answer some questions concerning Scotland's independence, right?
Hopefully. We'll see.
Let's start some walking up. We wake up call for Scotland, right? So, right. We're serious. Scotland needs to, wake up and start paying attention, as you know, because the ground beneath is shifting again, and far too many people are acting like it isn't happening. And the danger isn't some distant storm away on the horizon anymore, but it's moving closer. Let's face it. Westminster politics is drifting further and further away. The kind of country many Scots believe Scotland actually is. And every single time that happens, Scotland gets dragged along regardless of how she votes. That's the fact as well. This is a part of that sticks in the throat of so many of us. Hope you agree on that. You can vote one way in Scotland. Your neighbour can vote one way. Your city can vote one way. Right? The nation itself can vote one way and still wake up under governments and policies Scotland rejected.
It's one of the great political lies that Labour governments in Westminster need Scottish votes. They do not, and they never have. Even when Scotland has voted overwhelmingly for the SNP, we've had governments that did not require a single Scottish vote. The last couple of Tory governments were elected without needing more than half dozen seats in Scotland. So it's always been nonsense. They get dragged wherever England follows. That is the fact of it.
As you know, people could argue all day long about constitutions, economy, currency models, deficits, frameworks, and heart of this entire debate sits one simple question. Should Scotland have the right to choose the direction she goes in? Because right now, many Scots didn't feel like that she truly does. As you know. Just now, look at the political direction coming out for Westminster in recent years. Culture was imported straight for the American right. Constant hostility around immigration. Privatisation creeping into public services. Attacks on human rights law. Attempts to undermine devolution whenever Holyrood steps out of line politically. Even, the language used towards Scotland at times is this tone of the irritation, as though Scotland expressing a different democratic opinion and somehow inconvenient. And now let's move on to some parties like Reform UK. What actually that is. Reform UK arising in influence, pulling political debates even further toward hard rising populism. Whether people support Reform UK or not, it's not even the point here. That Scotland consistently votes differently on many major political issues. And so it still risks being governed by agendas it didn't choose. So that frustration is real, so real, deeply real, And some people in Scotland are tired, so knackered of being taught simply accept it quietly. Because let's be honest here, Scotland was promised many things in 2014. In our first referendum, independence referendum 2014. Huge promises, emotional promises, grand promises made by panicking their voices as the polls tightened and Westminster suddenly realised Scotland might actually leave. But remember the vow. Foresight. The famous vow of further powers remains one of the most debated examples. Scotland did receive additional devolved powers through the Scotland Act of 2016. But critics argue that Westminster retained control over many major economic levers, including national insurance, corporation tax, and significant areas of welfare spending. Others point toward economic and industrial examples. The Peterhead carbon capture project was presented as part of Scotland's green economy. Shipbuilding commitments on the Clyde became another source of controversy after projected defence numbers were revised downward. So the powers handed over after the referendum, were seen by critics as limited compared to the rhetoric used during the campaign. Westminster still retained control over major economic levers, rats. Key taxation powers remained reserved. Welfare remained largely controlled by London. And over time, many people began to feel that soaring language of 2014 simply didn't match the reality that followed. Thinking Brexit. And this is the moment many independent supporters will never forget. Scotland voted to remain. Scotland at 62% voted to remain.
Yeah.
And the European Union clearly, democratically, unequivocally. Yet Scotland left anyway because England voted differently overall across UK. The one moment changed the constitutional debate forever. People were told during the referendum that voting no protected EU membership. Sounds like a bribery, intimidation. They were told leaving the UK endangered Scotland's European police. Then 2 years later, Scotland found herself pulled out against her will anyway. For many Scots, trust cracked badly at that point. Not because everybody loved the EU, not because everybody wanted independence overnight, but because people saw with brutal clarity how little power Scotland ultimately had when Westminster decided otherwise. And once that feeling settles into the bones of a nation, it doesn't disappear easily. No. There's the economic side of things, which rarely gets discussed honestly enough. When Westminster cuts spending in England, Scotland's budget suffers through the Barnett formula consequences. When austerity bites, Scotland feels it. When public services are squeezed elsewhere, pressure lands here too. Coon sales struggle, NHS waiting times rise, infrastructure suffers. Holyrood then gets blamed by the furious voters for systems strained by decisions that often originated outside Scotland altogether. That creates, political resentment, understandably so. People look around and think, hold on a minute, how many times must Scotland vote for one direction and receive another anyway? This is not just abstract policy either. There are specific examples that still leave bitterness behind. Take the promises around defence jobs and the Clyde shipyards. Scots were told shipbuilding orders depended upon remaining in the UK. Then, frigate numbers were reduced after referendum anyway. Another broken promise. And the Peterhead carbon capture, hailed during the campaign as proof of Scotland's energy future, was secure within the Union. Only for funding support to later appear. Renewable subsidies were scaled back. Industrial jobs were lost despite all warnings. Voting no protected them. Of course no. Too many independent supporters. This wasn't one broken promise, it was a pattern. A pattern of Scotland being talked to that Westminster needs her vote, then ignored once the moment passes. And you can feel that exhaustion growing now. Because people in Scotland are so tired of hearing Scotland described as too poor, too weak, too incapable, too independent to manage her own affairs. Tired of being told that living in Scotland somehow makes you naive or dangerous, or even stupid. Tired of constant negativity directed at the very idea of Scottish self-government. Meanwhile, Scotland contributes enormously in energy, education, science, culture, food, tourism, and innovation. Scotland is not some helpless appendage hanging off Westminster charity. Never was. This is an old, passionate nation, an ancient one. Nation with its own legal system, educational system, culture, political identity. And many Scots increasingly feel that those differences are not being respected within the current constitutional arrangements. Now, does that automatically mean independence solves every problem? Of course not. Any honest person knows independence would bring challenges, risks, and huge economic decisions. Serious ones, difficult ones. But this is not really the point many independent supporters are making anymore. The point is about democracy. The point is about responsibility. The point is about accountability. About whether decisions affecting Scotland should primarily be made by government Scotland actually elects. So this is the emotional core underneath all this, I always say this too. Westminster has badly underestimated how emotional the constitutional issue became after Brexit. People thought the independence movement would fade away after 2014, Instead, it embedded itself deeper into Scottish political identity, because events afterwards kept reopening the wound. Every Tory government Scotland rejected strengthened the feeling further. Every broken promise deepened distrust further. Every snaring comment about Scotland being subsidised and irrelevant hardened attitudes further. And now, with the political currents across the UK becoming increasingly volatile, many Scots are once again looking ahead nervously and thinking, where exactly is the Union heading? Because if Westminster continues, drifting toward hard right populism, while Scotland continues voting for mere socially democratic politics, that democratic tension only grows sharper. And at some point, something has to give. Maybe that means a reformed union someday. Maybe federalism, maybe another referendum eventually. Maybe something entirely different. But I genuinely don't believe that constitutional argument is going away. Too much has happened. Too much trust has been lost. Too many people now question whether Scotland's voice truly matters. Equally within the system as it currently stands. And perhaps that is how the independence movement still burns so fiercely in the hearts of many, many Scots, despite everything thrown at it over the years. So because underneath all the politics, of course, underneath all the statistics and newspaper headlines and television debates and pitch, there remains the stubborn emotional belief in Scotland should have the right to shape her own future. Not because independence is magically easy. Many Scots, so as me, simply believe that a decision about Scotland should belong to Scotland. And whether people support independence or oppose it, one thing is undeniably true. The constitutional question is far from dead. In fact, it feels that more alive now than it has in years. And maybe that's what Westminster never truly understood about Scotland. This isn't just politics to us. It never was. It is hard. It's identity, of course. It's looking at this bonny, battered nation and knowing she deserves better than being treated like a pawn and an afterthought whenever London power games begin. It's hearing Scotland's voice ignored time and time again and feeling the ache deep in the soul. It is watching promises made of smiling faces, only to see them broken once the danger passed. Enough of Scotland being spoken down to. Enough of Scotland being dragged places that she didn't vote to go. Enough of Scotland being told she's too wee, too poor, too stupid to stand on her own 2 feet. Because I didn't believe that for 1 second. As a Scotland ambassador and rebel, I'll never accept it. I believe Scotland is stronger than ever give her credit for. I believe that there's still fire in this nation, as always was. Still pride. Still that old lion-heart spirit that refused to die, no matter how much Westminster tries to smother it beneath fear, division and manage decline. And maybe it's a ginger witch instinct in me speaking again. But I feel something's shifting in the air around Scotland. The mood is changing. Quietly at first, and all at once. More people asking questions. More people losing faith in Westminster promises. More people beginning to realise that it's the arrangement isn't working the way we're taught it would. History moves slowly. And until suddenly it doesn't, one day Scotland will make her choice again. And when that day comes, it won't be about hatred or bitterness, you know. It will be about hope, about dignity, about finally believing enough in ourselves to say Scotland's future should belong to people who live here. No fear, no threat, no broken vows, no Westminster government. Scotland rejects it. Scotland. And when that day finally comes, I personally think, this old passionate nation will rise yet again with tears in her eyes, a fire in her soul, and say, at long last, no more speaking for us, no more deciding for us. The future is ours now. And honestly, I think that day is coming. Now, my partner here will answer some questions. Alright, so
Go on.
how did you first become a supporter of independence?
Well, first, Paulina, well done on giving us the emotional argument. I'm now going to give you some political perspective on this. I was a Glasgow Labour and trade unionist in my teens and in my early 20s, and I never would have supported the cause of independence. I never believed that I would find myself in a place where not only was I voting SNP, but where I was voting for an independent Scotland. But things change. And it's even more incredible, actually, when you think that to be a member of Scottish Labour, and Glasgow Labour in particular, is to be born with a visceral hatred of the SNP, dating back to 1979 and the fall of the government that led to Thatcher. There's a lot of myths about that, which I won't go into here, but it was never as cut and dry as that. That was about Labour shooting off its own foot more than it was about the SNP ushering in a Tory government. One of the great many lies about the SNP and about their relationship with Labour and Scottish politics that have existed over the years. But coming from that background, the idea that I was ever going to vote for independence would have seemed absolutely absurd. And then around about 2012, when we got the Scottish Parliament majority and the Scottish Parliament decided it was going to legislate for it, I thought, I'll take a look at the whole issue. And one thing kept coming back to me over and over again, as I said earlier on, all these years that we have followed wherever England has dragged us. We've not had any choice in the matter. And my starting principle was that Scotland, again, should never have a government that Scotland did not vote for. At the time, it was about preventing Tory governments being imposed on Scotland by England. But as Scotland's social politics and England's social politics started to drift further apart, and as the two countries became more distinct ideologically, the more imperative I thought that it was that Scotland was able to make its own decisions and chart its own genuinely independent course. Because we're not England. We have a different culture. We have a different cultural ethos. We have a different social philosophy up here. And I know a lot of people think it's exaggerated, but it really isn't. And I thought that it was high time that we were making our own decisions and standing on our own 2 feet. And I never understood. Once I started looking at the arguments, I couldn't see any compelling reason why we couldn't and shouldn't do it. And in 2014, when the referendum was launched, I flung myself wholeheartedly into it. Started a website called Comment Isn't Free, which was about Scottish politics. And little by little, the Scottish social media sphere started dismantling all the arguments. And every time we dismantled one argument, they would come up with a brand new scare story. I mean, anybody who was around at the time will remember Scotland will not be protected from the Russians. And then when we were like, well, you know what, we'll still be a member of NATO, we'll still be a member of the EU. So let's not worry too much about the Russians. It shifted subtly to we will no longer be protected from aliens. And all sorts of mad nonsense like that in the Daily Express and other right-wing newspapers who were taking all sorts of mad flights of fantasy. And although some of it was laughable, some of it was deadly serious. When they started threatening that we would not have access to the pound, when they started threatening that the European Union was going to tear up our membership because the membership was Britain, not Scotland and England. It was much of it was laughable, but some of it was really serious. And there, as Paulina pointed out, as the case got better and the polls tightened and more people were in favour of the independence debate, we started getting the lies, the even bigger lies. And that culminated, of course, in the final week with the vow, which was the brainchild of, it seems to have been the brainchild of Gordon Brown. And the guy who was the editor of the Daily Record at the time, can't remember his name, but it was their wee brainchild, and it was splattered all over the front page of one of Scotland's leading rancid tabloid newspapers. And it was a brazen lie. And a lot of us in the independence movement said it was a brazen lie and made sure that we publicised that it was a brazen lie, and it did no good. It shifted maybe 2%, but that 2% was enough. And that is why we are here. That is why I am here. Independence was betrayed, in my view. We were lied to just as the English electorate was lied to over Brexit. And because it was easier to believe, for some people to believe the lies, and the lies gave them a alibi for rejecting their own country's future and destiny. And it was easier than having all this fear about what might happen in an independent Scotland. People chose to cling to the lie, and it's a tragedy, and it's an issue that requires a historical course correction. So that's why I want a second independence referendum, because I don't think anything will stop us this time. I don't think there is a lie big enough to stop us this time.
The Celtic nations unite.
Well, I mean, the phrase is coming out of vogue more and more and more as constitutional convention. And the reason we need a constitutional convention is because for the first time, the parts of this island are the parts of this wee tiny group of islands that don't want to be chained to England are all unified and speaking with one voice. We all have our different perspectives on it. For the north of Ireland, they want unification with the south. But Sinn Féin have a clear mandate to go and seek some form of discussion on that. The Welsh have never been as patriotic and as passionately independence-oriented as the Scots. So for the fact that the Welsh have kicked Labour out for the first time ever is seismic, and it's pretty clear now that Britain is a broken country, and that all the various bits that have been glued together to make this country up have all come apart, and they don't want to live in the same house any longer. And I mean, who would? You look at Westminster, and who would want to live in that house any longer? The country is in a bad way, but the three Celtic parts of it have said enough of this already. Enough of this. It's game over.
What do you think about the state of Westminster politics right now?
Westminster politics has been screwed since about 2010. It's been screwed since about 2010. And what fundamentally broke it was the Tory Lib Dem coalition. Because for a lot of people on the left, the idea that the Lib Dems would ever have entered the coalition with the Tories and imposed austerity and things like that on the country was unthinkable. Unthinkable. The Lib Dems were always viewed as being social democratic, and they were always viewed as being broadly aligned with Labour values and Labour ideals. And the idea that they would ever have teamed up with David Cameron and George Osborne and then imposed austerity on the country would just have been too ridiculous for words. The great historic irony, of course, is that Cameron screwed them. And they were brought into the coalition, and Cameron and Osborne gave them cabinet seats, and they were made to feel like they were part of the project. And all the while, the closer we got to the 2015 election, the more the Tories screwed them out of, not just out of office, but out of relevance in UK politics. The Tories weaponised every single choice that the Lib Dems made in that election against them. I mean, there's a story about Danny Alexander, who was one of the guys who was brought into the cabinet. Him going to his constituency, him going to a factory in his constituency and finding out that 2 days before, Tory ministers had been there touring the place. He was like, what the hell's going on? He had no idea that was going to happen. And when he asked about it, he was told that it was a coincidence, it was a scheduling mistake. But he later found out, of course, that Tories were targeting, I think, the top 30 Lib Dem constituencies or something to try and flip them. And it was wildly successful in 2015. The Lib Dems were reduced to a tiny, tiny rump in Westminster. And the Tories, of course, won a majority. And so that's what screwed it. The actual fact that the British left was split in the way that it was to facilitate a Tory government. And then that Tory government weaponised that against its coalition partner, destroyed them as a political force for a few years and won a majority. And we were off to the races because in order to win that majority, with the rise of UKIP and the fact that the Tories had lost the European election before that and the council elections before that, the idea that Cameron was never going to promise an EU referendum at some point was ludicrous. There was no way that Cameron was going to get away with that. Cameron had to make that concession to his right flank. And I believed from the moment the referendum was called that we would lose it. I never believed there was any conceivable prospect of winning the EU referendum. Never believed there was any prospect of it at all. And then when I read Tim Shipman's book on it, I remember the name off the top of my head, but Tim Shipman's book about how the referendum was won and lost, it was clear from almost the first that the Leave side had all the momentum, and their intellectual guys were better than ours were. They'd done their data modelling, they'd done their opinion polling, they knew exactly what to do, what not to do, what to ask, what not to ask. I mean, even the question itself, yes or no. The way it happened in Scotland was we had yes or no, so it's a binary choice, right? They knew that if they had made the EU referendum a yes or no question, that yes would probably have squeaked it. Leave Remain sounds a lot more vague, and it's a lot more. And they actually had polled that the question itself was worth 2 or 3 percentage points to their side, and so they knew right away that they had that 2 or 3 point advantage that the other side didn't realise was even there. And the second that they won that argument, that was the foundation for the whole victory. I mean, it was incredible. They were immensely good at what they did. The Farages and the Dominic Cummingses and people like that, they were incredibly good. They were so far ahead of their side, intellectually and strategically, that it wasn't even a contest. It was never even going to be a contest. And from the moment Cameron got elected in 2015, that referendum was inevitable. And from the moment the referendum was inevitable, the result was inevitable. And that Scotland would vote Remain was a foregone conclusion. That England would vote Leave was equally foregone. I mean, you had parts of England like Sunderland, depending on EU subsidies and EU money, voting to leave. I mean, that's how well they did their job, and that's how well they made their argument. And you couldn't compete with that. That same argument had no traction up here at all. And Westminster politics has been broken ever since. Because first the EU referendum was supposed to deliver the Brexiteer paradise, of course, right? But because the Brexiteer paradise was based on lies, it was never realisable. So you had the May government, you had Cameron's resignation, then you had the May government. The May government was getting eaten alive from the inside by people like Johnson, right from the start, from the very beginning. They were determined to bring her down and impose their own version of Brexit on the country. But Brexit was always an unrealisable ambition Because, okay, you exit the EU, then what? All the structural problems in the British economy are still there, and you've added to them. So you kick the immigrants out, right, but then you collapse the NHS and you collapse all these other industries which depend on immigration. And we're still trying to reckon with the consequences of that decision 10 years on. It's insane. But it broke the Tory party into a million bits. And at the same time, the 2015 result broke the Labour Party into a million constituent bits. And the left emerged stronger in that period and voted for Corbyn. But the Tory party went through its wee period where it was assassinating leaders left, right and centre. The Labour Party tried to bring down Corbyn several times, which of course they failed to do because the left was so entrenched and so powerful at that time. 2019 general election, Boris Johnson wins, Corbyn resigns, Starmer elected, right? And the bloodletting, a lot of people thought, well, maybe this is the end of the madness. We weren't even close to the end of the madness. Because Starmer's time in office, his early period in office was terrible. And there was talk all the way through Starmer's early period about when he would get overthrown, when the Labour Party would have to act to remove him before an election. Of course, Johnson goes shortly after he's been re-elected and wins his landslide majority. Johnson doesn't last very long. Then we have Liz Truss for 40-odd days of absolute chaos. And then Richie Sunak. And on and on and on. And British politics is fundamentally screwed. I mean, the events of 2010 and the shattering of the left, the events of 2015 and 2016 and the shattering of the right, and then the aftermath of the referendum and Corbynism, and on and on and on. I mean, the Labour Party is now in a place where its MPs know that they can bring down the leader if they apply sufficient pressure. The Tory party has known that since its inception and has been good at assassinating leaders and is on an absolute blood frenzy at the moment. And there's no end to this. I listened to a couple of political commentators the other day talking about, are we now in a cycle where a Prime Minister's term of office lasts 2 years before there's some plot inside his own party to get rid of him? And that may very well be where we are. And a system that acts like that is screwed. And there's no fixing it. All that remains is to break it and rebuild it in some other new form. And we need to be as far away from it as possible. We need to be miles away from it. And know that things up here have always been calm, because don't forget, we lost 2 First Ministers to, by the way, relatively minor, modest scandals. And the people involved were people I was politically close to in my time in Labour, and I thought they were I thought it was pretty ludicrous overall to lose someone like Henry McLeish, or a minor matter that wouldn't even register as an event in Westminster. And so we've had some volatility here, but nothing like what we're seeing in England. Nothing like it. And I don't see any sign that the madness that's going on in Westminster is going to end anytime soon. If Starmer will fall before the turn of the year, Starmer will probably not even last to the end of this month. I mean, if things go the way they're going.
Hope so.
And whoever takes over from Starmer, and it looks as if Andy Burnham has found his way back to Westminster, and Starmer's not going to stand in the way. So it'll be Andy Burnham, possibly. But there's so many divisions within Labour right now, and the right hates the left and the left hates the right, that Andy Burnham's political life expectancy probably won't be measured in very much longer than 18 months. And if Labour hasn't significantly improved its poll rating in 18 months, then this whole thing's going to start again about who replaces him before the general election if Labour still have a chance of winning. I mean, it's nuts. It's all gone nuts down there. Both parties are now addicted to regicide. And that addiction does not leave your bloodstream once it enters it. It's going to be chaotic down there for years to come. Years to come.
Right.
And this, by the way, is to say nothing for what government England might elect next in force on us.
All right, now we hear about Nigel Farage. How big your threat is Nigel Farage, do you think?
Well, there it is in a nutshell, because that is the next government that's going to get opposed on us. I mean, right now the opinion polls would suggest that Reform will be about 40 seats short of a majority, anywhere between 40 and 70. The estimates vary, but it's going to be around about 40-ish. Short majority should give us some comfort, but it really shouldn't. And it really won't. Because the idea that Kemi Badenoch and what's left of the Tory party at the end of the next election won't immediately climb into bed with Farage is too daft to even properly discuss. That's an absolute inevitability. I put it this way. If Kemi Badenoch leads the Tories in the next election, they get reduced to a tiny rump of MPs, and those MPs are necessary for a Farage government. If Kemi Badenoch hesitates even for 1 second to join that coalition, she's politically dead in the water, and they will simply overthrow her and elect somebody who will do it. So it's not even a question. It will happen. And the prospect of a Farage government, I can tell you, is the scariest political prospect that I have ever personally faced. And I don't think you can overstate how dangerous it is. For a start, we don't know who Farage really is. What we do know about Farage is all highly unpleasant. He's a racist. He's an ethno-nationalist. He's an anti-Semite. He's a bigot of the purest form. He may hide it well, but then a lot of them do. But not well enough, because there's all sorts of stories out there about. Anybody who wants to know what Nigel Farage's political views are on immigration, on the Jews, on ethno-nationalism, only has to look at his comments on him. He's got a long history of comments on this stuff, and it's not even particularly well. It's not hidden at all. It's all out there for anybody who wants to look. The media has downplayed a lot of it for a long time for reasons past understanding. The right-wing media will not mention it at all, but it's all there if you want to see it. And it's not even so much Farage is a dangerous guy, and he is a dangerous guy. It's the people who are behind Farage who are really dangerous, who we don't even know who they are. As I say, we don't know really all that much about Farage. We know some of his politics, we know a lot of his political views, and what we know is pretty loathsome. But we don't know who's, if you'll pardon the expression, we don't know whose hand is up his arse, right?
That's all right. That's all right.
He got a £5 million gift from a US crypto billionaire. And this £5 million gift has been explained in a million different ways. It was about his personal security. Royals don't even need £5 million personal security. It's apparently it was to help him buy a house, which he spent 1.5 million of it on a house, indeed. And there's all sorts of these crazy stories getting trotted about why he got the £5 million. We know it's a political bribe. That's what it is. These people want something, and they think Farage is the next Prime Minister. And the thing about Farage is that he's cheap. You can buy Farage cheap. A Donald Trump, you have to spend hundreds of millions, maybe even billions, to buy influence with that guy. You can give him a gold-plated jet plane kind of thing in order to buy influence with him. Farage will work cheap. Farage will work for £5 million. And this won't be the only terrible thing like that we find out about Farage. Farage is probably tied to the Russians. He certainly spent a lot of time on Russian state TV. He's certainly been paid by Russian state TV to make appearances. We can trace a lot of the Brexit funding to Russia and other horrible regimes.
People call him the father of Brexit. Is that true?
Yeah. But who's the father of Farage? Who's hands up his arse? Who's funding him? Who's pushing him? Who's making sure that Farage has got a smooth ride? There's so many dodgy things with Farage that we know, and so many dodgy things that we suspect. And a Farage government is a truly terrifying prospect, in part because we don't know who Farage really is and who's holding the strings. But it's also a pretty terrifying prospect when you see the people in his party, right? Politics has always attracted oddballs and lunatics, right? Exhibit A, right here. But I've never seen a stranger bunch of oddballs and lunatics than the people that surround this guy. They don't seem to have a policy platform worth a damn. And the stuff that they have declared that they're willing to do is pretty terrifying, pretty horrible. But other than that, they don't seem to have a political platform. So we don't actually know what we would be electing. It certainly will be Scotland that elects them. So let me put that right out there right now. Farage is an English disease, and it's a disease that they want to import to Scotland. And they got 20% in the recent Scottish Parliament elections. To me, that's the ceiling, and that's too much. These are dangerous people. You look at Richard Tice and some of the ideas that he has. You look at some of their the people who funded them down south, some of the institutions that they've been linked with, and these are like the hardcore right, the kind of Liz Truss far right lunatic brigade. There's a book called Cruel Britannia, which everybody should go and find and read. It's a very interesting case study of some of these people. James O'Brien has written an excellent book called They Broke Britain, which tells you a lot about not only Farage, but about guys like Matthew Elliott and the people who are fluttering around Farage and will certainly be part of his administration as they were part of Tory austerity governments, that this guy will bring in policies that will make austerity look like it was nothing. The NHS will be fully privatised under Farage. There's no even the slightest doubt about it. They don't even hide that fact. The Scottish Parliament itself might be abolished. There are members of his party who've talked about that. He himself has said that he doesn't see a legitimate need for the Scottish Parliament. I mean, this isn't just the right. This is the far right and the oddball, crazy internet conspiracy theory right. I mean, this is Trumpism for Britain. Only in its own way weirder and stranger and more unstable. Because, I mean, you've seen some of the councils that Farage and Reform have taken over down in England, and they fought with each other, they fought with other councillors, they make promises that they'll not cut services, and then they cut services. At least two of the councils that they've taken control of, previous to last week's election, have already fragmented and are now run by like minority government or minority groups, and it's a mess. I mean, the idea that these people would ever be entrusted with governing the country is pretty terrifying. Pretty terrifying. I've seen a lot of stuff in politics, and I've seen some proper far right Tory leaders, people like Michael Portillo, people like Ian Duncan Smith, and some pretty scary Tory manifestos. Nothing has ever scared me as much as this guy does. Nothing has ever been as grim a prospect. And I think that we probably have 18 months in front of us, which are probably going to be the biggest 18 months that Scotland constitutionally has ever faced. And if we're not at least halfway out the door with a referendum already secured, and we're not already moving in that general direction, we are going to be dragged along with England yet again, only to a place we have never seen anything like before. That's a pretty appalling prospect. And if Scottish independence is what it takes to prevent that, then people who are not in favour of Scottish independence right now better get in favour of it pretty quick.
Especially one city in Scotland. They should.
I'm not going to.
But I think Herwell as well. I'm not going to say the name, but
they voted no last time, but they better get some common sense about them this time.
Alright, how will Westminster respond to a Scottish Parliament's demand for independence referendum?
They'll reject it outright. They'll reject it outright at first. But they're going to be on technical.
That's what they act. They reject everything, as you know.
Yeah, they'll reject it at
That's
first.
the reason.
Of course they will. But they're going to be on pretty shaky ground if they do reject it. These people can claim that they respect democratic principles and democratic values only when they grant those democratic principles and democratic values to Scotland. Like, there isn't a single political commentator in England who does not know that the overwhelming probability right now, I think electoral calculus has a Reform majority about 20%. It has a Reform coalition government at about 30-odd%. So they know that there's like something like a 60% chance that it'll be Nigel Farage and Downing Street. I think the actual odds are much higher than that, but they reckon statistically it's about a 60% chance. Whether it's a majority government or part of a coalition with the Tories. And they know that Scotland won't vote for that. I mean, they know that Scotland will absolutely reject that. The current projection is for 49 SNP seats. If the election were held tomorrow, there would be 49 SNP seats in Scotland. So they know that Scotland will overwhelmingly reject a Farage government. And they cannot pretend that that's democracy. They cannot pretend that imposing that on us is fair when we reject it so completely. And they cannot warn about the danger of Farage in terms of England, and then be kind of blithely accepting that if England votes for it, that Scotland is stuck with it. I don't see how there's a moral, defensible argument to be made there. Democracies do screwed up things. People forget that Orban was recently voted out of power, which means that for all its political complexities and the nastiness of the Orban regime, that it was a democratically elected government. Vladimir Putin says a democratically elected government. If we want to use the really bad historical example, Adolf Hitler was a democratically elected leader. You know what I mean? The idea that democracies always get things right, or that democracies don't sometimes elect dangerous lunatics, and sometimes elect dangerous lunatics who don't even particularly like democracy, as in the case of Donald Trump. I mean, how many warnings do we need? And the idea that Westminster would impose that on us when Scotland has clearly said it does not want it and will not accept it, it's disgusting. When we go in front of Westminster and we ask for a referendum and they say no, they're going to face some very hard questions about how they defend that. And it will be up to the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people how we respond next. Obviously, we'll keep it civil. We'll keep it within the law. But that leaves a lot of room.
That's Celtic Nations United together. That works perfectly well, I think.
And listen, Westminster's going to have to answer one fundamental question, right above every other question. What are we worth to it? What do they want with us? What do they want with Scotland at this point? Right. The whole too wee, too poor, too stupid argument comes up all the time, right? And I think if you're one of the people making that argument, then you're one of the stupid people.
Scotland, sorry for my remark, but if they think that Scotland is such pain in their ass, so why not let her go?
There is, right, there it is. At this point, what are you keeping us for? At this point, why not just grant the referendum and let Scotland decide what it wants to do? If you believe the narrative, if you believe the anti-independence narrative, and it's made by a lot of people, right, who could barely string two sentences together, and you can see that in their analysis of it, Scotland would be bankrupt. Scotland would be exposed to the risks of a Russian invasion and all the usual crap that was through it as in 2014. It's the same arguments recycled. Scotland cannot sustain itself. Scotland is too small a country. And the world is too big and bad for a wee tiny country like Scotland to make it. You know what? Let that be your problem. Let that be your problem. Let us worry about how we're going to cope. Let us worry about how we're going to stay safe. Let us worry about how we're going to stay warm.
The example of Norway. Wee country. Even better way than Scotland.
Europe is full of wee countries doing just fine. So the argument itself doesn't make any sense. But it's not even so much that the argument doesn't make any sense, right? It's the vitriolic way that some people put the argument forward. It's the bitterness and the anger and the contempt and the language that they use, which is hard to credit.
They offend Scotland for a time.
You know, it's like
it's outrageous.
If we are such a burden, if we are such a pain in your arse, let us go. Just open the door and let us leave. We want to leave.
We just go separate.
56% of the Scottish people support independence at this point. The closer we get to the probability of a Farage government, and God knows what that entails, and none of it will be good, the higher that number will be. And the only answer that we get is, oh, you're too poor, too stupid to take care of yourselves. Well, let that be your problem, honestly. But stop pretending that this is about what benefits us. Because anybody making the argument that we're too weak, too poor, too stupid is basically saying, we're keeping you here for your own good. But if you can tell me how it benefits Scotland to watch Nigel Farage walk up Downing Street and walk through that black door, then I'm all ears, I'm listening. I'm willing and ready to hear it. If you can explain to me how ignoring the democratic wishes of the Scottish people benefits Scotland, I'm all ears. If you can tell me how it is politically legitimate to tell us that our democratic voice does not count, not only in terms of our express wish to go it alone, but our express wish to avoid an English-inspired Farage government running this country. I'm all ears. Really, it's an argument that the argument starts from the premise, and then they're going to have to justify it. I'm willing to listen, but I don't think they're going to sell it. I don't think they'll sell it to me. I don't think they'll sell it to the majority of Scottish people. It's time to just get real about this. It's time to get real. Don't pretend you're doing this for our benefit.
No.
This is for the benefit of Westminster politicians. This is about it's about English ego and arrogance as much as anything else. It's about Westminster politicians who want to stroll around the world.
English attitude towards Scotland
It's about people who can't
really.
See, one of the things that I've heard very often, right, and I've read a lot of really good informed stuff about it. Fiona Toole writes some really good stuff about it. About the English identity, the English national identity. Scotland has a national identity. Scotland has a sense of history, a sense of its own history and its own place as a country. England does not have the same sense of itself as a place. A lot of English national identity is tied up in Britishness. It's tied up in the crown, the flag, the currency, and all that silly waffle, right?
Because union itself is just a crap.
That's how
united about what? I mean,
that's how they define themselves, Paul. Through the flag, through the crown, through the the institutions of Westminster and all that, right? And that now has no relevance for people up here. And by the way, it has no relevance for most people living in England either. Most people in England no longer care about the flag or the crown as being of primary importance to them. They just want their lives to matter again. They just want to feel like they have a government that understands them and understands the struggle, which is one of the things that makes electing Nigel Farage inexplicable to me, but okay. But they know they don't get that right now from the Tories, and they don't get it from Labour. So you've basically left people south of the border with nowhere to turn. We're lucky up here that we do have a place to turn, and that we have a good, strong national party that understands that Scotland has different needs than England, and we also have the Greens up here who understand that Scotland is a more socially...
Now the pro-independence party.
Yeah, a more socially... a less socially conservative place than England. Right, but, yeah, I mean, Westminster will reject us at hand, but it's an untenable position. It's an untenable position, especially when they know full well that Scotland will not vote for Farage, that Reform will not win a single seat in Scotland. And there's a prediction. Reform will not win a single seat in Scotland. They'll win an English electoral landslide, but not one seat in Scotland. And yeah, that's going to be your government. Those two positions don't stack up. You can't say that Scotland has to abide by democratic rule and then not grant Scotland's democratic choice. It's going to be very difficult to argue.
Right, I got comments recently on my latest video that Scotland doesn't deserve to be independent because Scotland is too wee, too stupid to be independent, and even that Scotland stole the part of Edinburgh that should be the English. What is talking about? And told us the voters of SNP, the Tories and Tartans. It was even offensive. What do you say to people? So, what do you say to people who say that Scotland is too wee, too poor, too daft?
Well, I think their brains are too wee and too stupid to properly understand what they're talking about. And the fact that they're recycling this Tartan Tories nonsense just proves the point. Because as I said at the start, this is one of the things. I come from the Scottish Labour background, right? And the abiding characteristic of the Scottish Labour Party is its visceral hatred of the SNP. And this was the standard Labour line for years, that they were Tartan Tories, traced back to 1979 and the downfall of the Labour government and the incoming Thatcher government, right? And it never stacked up then, it doesn't stack up now. One of the things that pushed me to vote SNP, see, I left Labour in 2012 because of Iraq. I left Labour over the Iraq war, and I'm not alone. A lot of very good people left Labour for the same reason. When you see a Labour Prime Minister banging the war drum and getting on board a utterly insane military adventure with a hard right American president, that does tend to make you sick to your stomach a wee bit. And I left because of that. And one of the things that I found weird was that the year that I was at my second year at uni was the where is a mature student, in case you wonder. My second year at uni was the year of the Iraq conflict, and myself and the other members of the Labour group at Stirling University got a Labour councillor elected during the Iraq War, right, which was an almost mystical achievement, right? And it's still something I'm very proud of. The fact that in a university seat, we got a councillor elected during Iraq. That was the only thing that people wanted to talk about, and we still managed to do it. So I was quite proud of that. What I wasn't proud of in terms of having done that is that within a couple of years, the Labour group on Stirling Council was working with the Tories. That they had formed a wee coalition to lock out the SNP. And that's one of the things that truly disgusts you when you see Labour's natural and hated enemy working hand in hand with them just to keep another party out. And that makes you sick. And it wasn't just in Stirling, it happened all over the country. You had Labour candidates going out and telling people the Tories are our enemies, and then as soon as they were elected, working with them on local councils just to keep out the SNP. So it was, this whole Tories idea has been around for a long time.
So your wee message to those people?
But it's the red Tories you always had to watch out for.
All right.
Labourites masquerading as being on the left and being socially responsible, working with the most hated people in politics in Scotland.
All right, so your wee message to those people?
They're idiots. Okay. Clowns. Too wee, too poor, too stupid. Tell it to the Norwegians. Tell it to the Icelandic. Tell it to the Albanians and all these other countries, right? No all of them are no all of them are economically strong. No all of them are particularly healthy countries. Mm-hmm. But they all found a way to stand on their own 2 feet. They all found a way to live with the choices they made.
Scotland can do it as well.
And so will we. But the one thing that we will always know is that any policy that we ever have imposed on us will be imposed on us by ourselves. We willed it into life. We voted for it. We supported it. And it'll be this. I always think about it as the same as when kids grow up and leave the family household, right? Some of them are going to make mistakes. Some of them are not going to do well. And some of them ultimately are going to want to come back home. That won't be Scotland, of course, in this case. But you let them stand on your own 2 feet. You let them go and make their own decisions and their own mistakes. And they live with those mistakes and those decisions. And so will we. Too wee, too poor, too stupid. Is that a reason to keep us here? Again, because that comes back to what I said earlier. This argument that we're doing this for your benefit. No one believes that any longer. No one believes that any of this is for our benefit. Scotland is kept in the Union against its will. Don't try and sell us the idea that we're kept in the Union because that's what's really good for us. Let us make our mind up.
Scotland is just way on the map. And it's bigger than you think, in reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, say yes for independent Scotland.
Yes, indeed.
And sure, Alba. See you after.